On the third floor of the East Tennessee History Center, tucked safely behind the front desk, there's a room to see the rarest of items in the McClung Historical Collection. The kind of treasures that don't just sit out on the shelf. You have to request them ahead of time. And then, lots of windows and security cameras make sure the crown jewels of East Tennessee history don't wander off.
At other libraries, and I won't name names, I've known important manuscripts and books to walk out the door. The McClung Collection, they really clamped down on security, and I was very pleased to see that.
Dan Pomeroy of the Tennessee Historical Commission says a room to share history and to protect history, well, that has Steve Cotham's name all over it.
I have known Steve for more years than either one of us would care to admit. About 1970, we were bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, eager young graduate students in history at the University of Tennessee. I was, of course, overjoyed to find out that he was head of the McClung Collection. It just went from A to Z in terms of professionalism.
I'm Sally Polhemus. I was the first archivist at the McClung Historical Collection. I started January 3rd, 1978. Steve Cotham joined the staff in October 1980. We had a very good working relationship. We quibbled like a married couple most of the time, and people thought it was funny. He could always see the big picture, and he saw the collection through some incredible changes. From computerization, getting the card catalog converted, putting all sorts of records and materials online. Those are big changes that we take for granted now, but he had a lot of foresight. But he was personally responsible for the collection getting so many valuable resources.
And for some of Knoxville's most renowned historians, the greatest resource was Steve.
Oh, well, Steve is a true historian. I was talking to Steve about something that I was interested in, and I was sure it didn't exist. Steve said, wait a minute, and brought back papers that were just unbelievable. He amazed me with the stuff that he pulled out and showed me.
Just his knowledge of everything. Knoxville, East Tennessee, he'll rattle off something. He's like, well, did you look at this book? And I'm like, no, it's easier just to ask you, because you're going to know it right off the top of your head.
Beyond the books, papers, photos, and films, Steve Cotham also worked for decades to secure and sometimes personally save some of the artwork that decorates the collection.
This is a museum not just of history, but of culture, which is part of history too. But you see Catherine Wiley paintings on the wall here. Catherine Wiley, the greatest impressionist from Tennessee, I think. Steve is just, he knows his history, but he also knows how to deal with artifacts and people who want to donate or sell or whatever.
Steve had a keen sense for what donations to accept, and a sense for what to turn down, and a sense of humor about that balance. In his on-screen comedy debut in 1989, in this video for the library about stress in the workplace and customer service.
Mr. Ross, I'm amazed that the carcass of Mary the Elephant was saved after she was hanged in Irving, Tennessee, 1916. Yes, that's one of my favorite bits of historical trivia. We get that question all the time, but I had no idea that the body of that elephant had survived. Well, it would be really interesting for a historical museum, but I'm afraid that the space might be a problem, and I'm not really sure about how one cares for aged elephant leather. Well, I'd be glad to take it to the committee, but if the library decides that we can't accept that for a historical museum, maybe the Children's Museum would like to have it. Well, thank you for thinking of us. We do appreciate it. And if you find something else you think would be appropriate, by all means, please give us a call.
Yes, Steve Cotham even brought laughter to the McClung Collection, all while making a serious impact on local history, far beyond the walls of the History Center.
I'm Dwayne Grieve, and I've known Steve for quite some time. Our first acquaintance, we met on the Historic Zoning Commission. I think the one thing that comes to mind is his involvement with the Faulkners on the Fort Sanders area in the Civil War to help them determine where the fort was and this sort of thing. I think that's really a highlight. Steve is a remarkable person.
And now the room for the rarest of materials features the name J. Stephen Cotham. a man whose dedication and professionalism are a priceless piece of the McClung Collection's history.
I think that the dedication of this room is really significant, and it's a real honor. When you think of the rare collections and you think about what goes on, you think of Steve.
Nothing compares to what Steve has brought to so much of East Tennessee and Knoxville history for decades. So this is a well-deserved honor, and Steve, I wish you the best.
He is so worthy. Edit. My whole job was to give him a hard time for 40 years. You're undoing it in just a few seconds. He was so dedicated to the collection. He had a vision for it. He had a plan to make it happen. And he was successful.
And so I think it's perfectly appropriate to name that room after Steve. His name and his work should be remembered. And if people have to kind of scratch their head in the future and say, Steve Cotham, who was Steve Cotham? Well, let them go find out.
When I finished my 2 university degrees in history and library science in 1978, the one place that I immediately knew that I wanted to work was the Calvin and McClung Collection. I had used the collection as a student, and I actually called the then librarian, Lucille Dedrick, to see if there were any job openings. And she said, they're very, very rare, but if you hear about one, you better jump on it. So I took a job at Georgia State in Atlanta for about 2 years, and a friend of mine, who's a reference librarian at the university, Tom Wisman, who's here today, told me there was an opening at McClung. And I applied for it, and I was lucky enough to get it. I remember my first day on the job was October the 6th, 1980. It was a beautiful, crisp autumn morning. And as I walked from Fort Sanders, where I was living downtown, to Lost McGee Library, I was just so happy. And Sally said, we're going to wipe that smile off your face. She really did. But I loved working here for all these many years, all the people I got to meet, the donors, the people who use the collection. It's just been fascinating, and if old age hadn't caught up with me, I'd still be here. But I realized it was time to go, and I am so happy that the staff is in place to keep carrying things forward, especially Adam and Eric and all the folks that, John, and all the people that have been here and will keep things moving in the right direction. Thank you.